Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. We have entered December. We have entered Big Ten Championship game week here in Happy Valley as Penn State prepares to play the top-ranked team in America. The Oregon Ducks have not lost this season. They'll take on the Nittany Lions on Saturday night in Indianapolis. Mark Brennan and Daniel Gallen will be out there, along with Grace Brennan, taking photos, representing Lions247.com at the Big Ten title game. And you'll hear from Mark and Daniel in just a moment as we look back to Penn State's 11th victory of the season, a 44-7 win over Maryland. If you missed our post-game podcast that we dropped on Saturday night from Beaver Stadium, encourage you to head back over, check that one out. Daniel and I spent about 45 minutes inside the stadium before closing up shop, giving you our thoughts on the Maryland game and really big picture what we experienced on Saturday coming to campus, thinking that the best thing that Penn State would be playing for would really be a college football playoff spot. And then by the time we left campus, all of a sudden they're in the Big Ten title game. We'll discuss recruiting as well in this episode. Tyler Calvaruso, a resident recruiting insider, will join us to break down takeaways from the Maryland guest list, which included a committed quarterback who's coming up on his signing day. Did Penn State maybe turn the tide and get themselves a top 24/7 passer late in this cycle? We have a few other things to address on the flip front as well, including a top 100 prospect who departed this 2025 Penn State class. And the early signing period opens on Wednesday. We'll do a little bit of some table setting with Tyler Calvaruso later. But as I mentioned, we'll begin this episode with Daniel Gallen and Mark Brennan coming off game number 12 on the regular season schedule. The regular season is wrapped up and we're in a postseason territory now. And Mark, we have a really good timing for people in terms of getting on board for VIP. It's Big Ten Championship week. First time that's happened here in 8 years. We got the National Signing Day 2 days away from us. I know people remember that being in February. It's in December, and it's earlier in December now than ever before. And there's a whole lot of other pieces playing around right now, including the transfer portal, the coaching carousel, a lot of VIP content coming your way. And before we go any further, Mark, passing you the mic. You gave everybody the heads up on our Black Friday deal last episode. That has transformed into a Cyber Monday deal, but there's no more transformation coming. This is the end of the deal, 75% off VIP access at Lions 24/7.
Yeah, first of all, thanks to all the people who came on board. We're in triple digits, which is really good. One of the network leaders, which is really good. And just very thankful for all the people who have come on board and for all the people who are longtime subscribers. But this is our best deal of the year, 75% off. It factors out to about 8 cents per day. And it's not going to only take you through, this time period. It's going to take you through next year at this time. When I was writing up the promo last week, one of the things I had in there, and I'm paraphrasing, I'm forgetting exactly what I wrote, on the off chance Penn State makes it to the Big Ten championship game, we will be there like we are at every game. And lo and behold, Penn State, that off chance came true. And as you mentioned, I'll be there, Daniel will be there, and Grace will be there shooting. So we will have three people covering it like nobody's business. And that means, pregame stuff on our message boards, in-game stuff, VIP stuff, all that, those different things going on. And then there used to be a time, folks, when the regular season ended and then, the coaches had like time off, like there would be some official visits, maybe, that sort of thing. Now, you mentioned it. I mean, this weekend, championship games, Wednesday, we don't even get 3 days. And it's early signing day. The transfer portal opens next Monday. And I'm going out of order. This is how confusing it is. And the bowls are set on Sunday. So I'm kind of hopping around, but it just gives you an idea for everything that's going on. So really, we've promoted this, and I appreciate people being patient with it, but it is our best deal of the year. So 75% off. Again, it comes out to less than 8 cents per day, and it's well worth your while. So anybody, give us the consideration, come on board, check it out. It's well worth your while. And if you're not ready to do that, get a monthly plan. You can come on monthly for $10 a month, and you get automatic Paramount Plus right off the bat. So that's with the monthly plan. On a promotional annual plan, you don't get it, but 75% off, our best deal of the year.
So there are the details. You have until midnight Monday. So I wanted to make sure we let off that podcast with.
And as you can tell, that wasn't scripted. I was just rambling all over the place. But I think it comes off better that way. If I sit here reading a promo, I'm going to sound like a bigger idiot than I am.
If you do want the finer print on this, you can find it over at lions247.com. But it's pretty cut and dried the way Mark laid it out. And additionally, if you want to get between now and the start of spring ball next year, late March, when this team is a new 2025 version of itself, I promise you, if you hop on board now, take advantage of our VIP coverage between now and then, you will be as well versed as any fan about those 2025 Nittany Lions when they're ready to get back on the field. But that's for another day. For now, we've got focus on last matchup and the one ahead of us. And as usual, Mark, we'll begin with a quick look back with you because Daniel and I had plenty to say about a 44-7 victory over Maryland. An ugly start, fumble on the first offensive play of the game, touchdown surrender on the first defensive play. And then all of a sudden, though, Penn State takes control. They're up 31-7 at halftime. A bunch of freshmen are out there by the end of this thing. And Penn State gets to the 11-1 record for the first time since 2008. Takeaways for you, Mark, from what was basically as anticipated on the field, but the day itself took a turn that none of us were really expecting.
Yeah, I'm in a different room than usual. I could look out and see Beaver Stadium in the press box, and it occurred to me as we're talking here that podcast stuff that you did, that may very well be the last video ever taken in that press box. So you guys will have that going for you as your careers go along. I can see the resumes right now. Daniel Gallen filmed last video in Beaver Stadium's ancient press box. But all kidding aside, little bit of a slow start. Do I buy the fact that Drew Allard didn't know the result of the Ohio State-Michigan game until after Penn State beat Maryland? No, not for a second. I have all the respect in the world for Drew Allard, and I appreciate the way he deals with the media, and that he figured he had to say that, but they absolutely knew. And I think James Franklin hit on it, that I don't think there was any question that there might have been some nerves and stuff early in that game. And the fact that they were able to overcome them and be ahead decisively at the half, that's what we were talking about last week going into that game, even not knowing what was going to happen, even if you had time off, because, that was three really key things happened in the second half. Number one, you were able to get a lot of your veteran players out of the game and keep them as healthy as possible. Number two, getting a lot of young players in. Hey, who knows where this is going with the number of games Penn State's still going to play? So having that depth is absolutely imperative. And then number three, and probably most importantly, for everybody in the media, we were able to start booking travel in the second half. We knew what was going to happen. So as you looked across the press row, the different press rows, you saw every media person on their Travelocity.com and all these different sites booking airlines and hotels and trying to figure it all out. But in all seriousness, I think that was kind of a best case scenario for Penn State, the way that it played out, outside of that rough start. But it goes back to what I've been saying since the USC game. This was before Ohio State. Take care of business. And I know that I'm beating that to death, but this is what happens. While everybody else is griping about where they're ranked, about falling in the rankings, about who's climbing in the rankings, about this conference, about that conference, win your games and things are going to work out. And Penn State 2024 is the perfect example of that. They lost a heart-wrenching game to Ohio State. And in previous years, that could have been it. But no, they kept their noses to the grindstone. I was very tough on the coaching staff and the players after that game because I thought they let one slip away. To their credit, they kept grinding and grinding and grinding and doing what they needed to do. And I thought it was an A-plus effort from everybody from that point on, even surviving the close games. I mean, that's what you have to do. Look around. Teams are not surviving those games. They're losing those games. So to be able to come out and do what they needed to do and get to Indianapolis, the opportunity presented itself. They were in position to take advantage of it.
You look across the college football landscape in the month of November, and it's littered with college football playoff contenders.
Carcasses.
Yeah, lost. Yeah, and in some cases, some of them will still get in. We expect, but they may have really cost themselves. And just in the last week, you look at Ohio State losing to Michigan. You look at Miami losing to Syracuse. You look at Georgia Tech going to eight overtimes on the road at Georgia against a Bulldogs team that everyone had penciled into the college football playoff already. And Penn State certainly had its brush with drama at Minnesota, but in the three other games that followed the Ohio State game, combined, Washington, Purdue, Maryland, 128-23 was the collective score of those three matchups. And, where Penn State's clearly has the edge in talent, clearly has the edge when you look at the coaching staff, and you saw that come to fruition on the field. Daniel, when it comes to the players of the game and the staff's picks for those, we saw two players on offense coming out of this one for Penn State. Tyler Warren, for the fifth time this year, is player of the game on offense. And then he's joined by Nick Singleton, who was also recognized as the staff's player of the game pick on special teams. Second time this month where we saw him do some real damage on a kickoff return. Earlier, it was wiped out by a penalty against Washington. This time it stood up and was a nice response to his early fumble. And then, of course, Tyler Warren, as usual, leading this team in receiving, six catches, 68 yards, and a touchdown. He also had a 29-yard run on the day and a 9-yard pass completion. So let's begin there. Singleton, Warren. One of them has been Mr. Consistent. The other has been a late riser in terms of where this offense is trending.
That's a good way to put it. You've got one guy who has been the most consistent weapon on this offense the entire year. James Franklin brought it up after the game where he said that every single team that plays Penn State, their game plan is they look at number 44. That's where it starts. And for basically the entire season, no one has really been able to take him away. And I think that that's a testament to Andy Kotelnicki, and it's a testament to just Tyler Warren as a player. On the other side of it, you've got Singleton, where Warren, Mr. Consistent, pretty much a flat line across the entire season. But Nick Singleton really seems to be peaking right now as we go into the offseason or into the postseason. We know that he started really well in September. That game at West Virginia, it looked like he was back. And a little dip in October, but right now things seem to be going in the correct direction for him. 13 carries, 87 yards, 2 touchdowns. He's shown that he can run away from players right now. He's shown that he can make guys miss. He can run over them. I just think that Singleton is in a really, really good spot right now, especially when you consider the level of competition that you're going to be facing this Saturday in Indianapolis and then through the college football playoff.
We'll talk a little bit more about Singleton and this running back tandem a little bit later and how they're going to the postseason. But defensive player of the week was Abdul Carter. It's his fifth time in 12 games where he's been that pick for the staff. Mark, a couple more sacks for Carter. He achieves Daniel Gallen's prediction of getting to a round number in that department. He's at 10 sacks on the year. First time since Carl Nassib back in 2015 where a Nittany Lion gets to 10 sacks, 19.5 tackles for loss. After the game, he told reporters he feels like he should be in the Heisman Trophy conversation. And, of course, try to make the case for all defenders to get a longer look in that. But he's up for a bunch of Defensive Player of the Year awards, and he was just absolutely consistent during Big Ten play, Mark. You look at the body of work, 9 of his 10 sacks came in Big Ten play, and 17 of his 19.5 tackles for loss came against conference opponents.
Yeah, and I think if you look at it further, Tyler, there's a situation where the opening game against West Virginia, who the hell was it? Who did they play to open the season? It seems like it was 6 years ago. He had 1 tackle, like no tackles for loss, no sacks, and everybody's wondering, hey, what's wrong with Abdul Carter? And I think a lot of people who kind of knew what he was all about realized there would be a little bit of an adjustment period. And the other thing that we saw at West Virginia is they were holding him like crazy. And he's been held all year, but to his credit, that's what great players do. Like, I watch my beloved Philadelphia Eagles, and I'm like screaming at the TV that their defensive linemen are being held on every play. That's what happens. I mean, holding happens all the time, and the great ones are able to defeat that and learn how to mitigate it. And that's what he's done as the season's gone along. And to his credit, he let Franklin do all the complaining about it. He never beefed about it. He just, I'm going out and doing my job and trying to do the best I could. And the fact that he's been able to overcome that, to me, I started looking at the stats after the game, guys, and you want to talk about somebody people really aren't talking enough about. I think he's been really overshadowed by Tyler Warren. Tyler Warren deserves every bit of praise that he's getting. But I mean, we haven't heard the effusive praise for Abdul Carter from, just across the board from everybody. And you look at his numbers. Do you have it there? How far ahead is he in tackles for loss, Tyler, in the Big Ten? Like 4 or 5?
I don't have the numbers in front of me right now. I know on this team, he's far, far, far and away. But yeah, he had a little bit of a gap between him and others going into the last week of the season, at least.
Yeah, so you're probably. I mean, I took a look at the different stats and stuff, and it's difficult. I'm glad I don't have to vote for those all Big Ten teams, because that's got to be so difficult now, especially with all these teams in there. But I can't imagine anybody's having a better year than he is defensively, and I would not be surprised if, when these awards come out, as we tape this Monday, the awards are coming out Tuesday, if he's the Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year. He has to be the Big Ten Defensive Lineman of the Year, I think. Daniel, do you follow? Is there anybody else that I'm missing?
Not off the top of my head. I think that you look at it and it's Abdul Carter. I think that, especially when you consider the heater he's been on since that Illinois game, like it's really, really tough to overlook him. So I guess I'd have to I'm going to do a little bit of homework later tonight, because we're getting the all Big Ten teams announced on Tuesday, and I'm going to have some stuff prepared, and maybe I'll come across some people who maybe stand out too. But I just think that where Abdul Carter is right now, I think that he's poised to get a lot of recognition this week and beyond. He's going to have a national showcase game against Oregon. I think that he'll be in the mix for some of these All-American Defensive Player of the Year awards. A draft analyst posted the All-22 cut-up of what Abdul Carter did to Maryland on Saturday. And I think it's only like a minute and 20 seconds, but it's a very impressive watch. It made me go back to the final game stats, and he only officially got credited with one quarterback hurry in that game. And you watch that clip, and he's just in the backfield over and over again. So you talk about Nick Singleton peaking right now. I think Abdul Carter is in that case now, even though maybe he peaked in against Illinois and has just been keeping it going the entire time.
And if you need legal advice, just go to his billboard down in Clark's Ferry, and he'll point you to the right lawyer to go to as well. I mean, he's doing it all.
He has 4.5 tackles for loss than anyone else in the Big Ten, to answer your question. I had a little time there to look it up. Mikhail Kamara from Indiana has 15 tackles for loss. Abdul Carter tops that list with 19.5, and he is tied for second in the league with 10 sacks. No one else has more than 10.5. So, yeah, we'll see what the awards come out with. Remember, last year, Carter was a first-team All-Big Ten linebacker. The year before that, he was a freshman All-American linebacker. I think he's going to get some serious hardware, and he's a finalist for multiple national awards that we'll keep tabs on moving ahead. Guys, coming out of, normally we're coming out of a press conference with James Franklin in Beaver Stadium on Mondays. That's not the case this week. The whole week is going to be a little bit different, some familiarities, but some differences. The Big Ten has some mandated media opportunities for us, which included Sunday afternoon. We had Dan Lanning, Oregon's head coach, followed by James Franklin on Sunday afternoon, a half hour with both coaches. As a result, no James Franklin press conference on Monday. We will speak with a few veteran players on this team with some Big Ten calls on Monday. Normally, we don't speak to players on Monday, but just a heads up, no James Franklin for us again until Wednesday post-practice. We'll be back out there, get a look at this team. And when we are back out there, we'll have to follow up on something James Franklin told us on Sunday, and that Harrison Wallace, leading wide receiver for this team, tweaked something last week. That's what James Franklin described. We saw Harrison Wallace in uniform before the Maryland matchup. He was listed as questionable, ultimately did not enter this game on offense. He had started the first 11 matchups. It was Omari Evans and Julian Fleming getting the starts at receiver. You got a bunch of Liam Clifford along the way as well. But you get to the finish line of the regular season, Daniel, and Harrison Wallace has more than double the amount of receptions of any other receiver. He's got 35 catches. Not a huge number, but kind of tells you where the receiver group has been. He's been the most consistent. I believe it was 7 consecutive games where he was at 45-plus receiving yards. Tyler Warren has been the number one target, but when you look at this receiver group, it's been Harrison Wallace going back to the first possession of the season at West Virginia. So it's clearly something we're going to need to monitor, because if you remove Harrison Wallace from the equation against a team like Maryland, maybe we don't notice it that much over a span of 60 minutes of football. If you do that in Indianapolis on Saturday against the top-ranked team in America, I have a sense it will be far more noticeable.
It's definitely a storyline for us to follow across this week. I think that Harrison Wallace didn't quite have that. What was it, 1,100 yards, Tyler, that you were looking for this season?
Right about there,
yeah. but I think he more than proved himself. I think to be a quality wide receiver in the Big Ten. I think that we know what he is at this point. He's a redshirt junior, so he's been here for 4 years and has played for the past 3. And we've seen him move the chains, come up with some big catches. He was a huge big play threat in that game against West Virginia to start the year. And I think that that's an element that you need to have on the field, because if he's not there, I know that Omari Evans has done some nice things as a deep threat and really supplemented it with some nice route running and other catches to move the chains as the season has gone on. But then, Omari Evans, Liam Clifford, Julian Fleming, each has had their moments in different ways, but that consistent effort that you've gotten from Harrison Wallace across the season with multiple catches across a ton of games, like you said, the at least 45 receiving yards in a game, 7 straight weeks. I think that's very, very valuable to an offense to move the chains, keep them on schedule. Tyler Warren can do a lot, but he can't necessarily do everything. We'll see. He'll probably prove me wrong on that too on Saturday. But I think that Trey Wallace has just been a very valuable member to this offense. I think that, a lot has been said about this wide receiver group. There's probably going to be a lot said about them, through the postseason into the offseason. But I think that Harrison Wallace's total body of work this year has been very, very solid for them. So we'll see how, what happens as we get to Saturday. But I think that if they don't have him, I think it could hamper the offense in a way. Like you said, you might be fighting against Maryland, but against Oregon, it might be a little bit of a different situation.
Check back with us on Lions247.com Wednesday evening when we come off the practice field. It should be a good indication of maybe where Wallace stands at that point of the week, whether or not he's participating in practice in uniform out there. We'll let you know. We'll also have a chance to check back in with James Franklin after that practice, and we'll bring that to you on Thursday with our preview podcast for this matchup. Harrison Wallace on the season, career high 35 catches, 579 yards. His average per catch is 16.5 yards. That's about 4.5 yards more than it was last year as a redshirt sophomore. Just a couple other notes as Penn State deals with some injury issues. No Elliott Washington. I think we noted that in our post-game show, but back-to-back weeks now where Penn State's sophomore cornerback has not been involved in the game plan, listed as out. Washington was at 25-plus snaps on 8 consecutive games prior to this span. So we'll keep tabs. Again, a guy we'll look for on the practice field. Aldavian Collins has stepped up in his absence, came away with his first interception. And then Nolan Rucci got some really strong reviews from James Franklin during that call on Sunday. I felt like last week when Nolan Rucci's name was brought up following the Minnesota matchup, there was a little more conversation to it. There was a little more, there's areas for improvement. We got stuff to work on. It felt like they were really comfortable with what Nolan Rucci gave them. He played as much as any starting offensive lineman against Maryland at the right tackle, and his performance against Oregon could go a long way in determining how they handle that defensive front. And then, Mark, we've been tracking the running back room the last 3 years with the same duo at the top of it. And there have been times when they have steamrolled opponents together. There have been times where one guy has kind of had to take the lead. We saw that for a phase of the season when Nick Singleton was banged up and relatively unavailable or limited in October, where Katron Allen got a little bit more of a workload than we're accustomed to seeing. But I think we get to the end of the regular season right now. You feel really good about where Nick Singleton is moving, that direction. But you wonder where it's gone with Katron Allen. Because I talked about going to the last game, his yards per carry has been down this season. You go over much of Big Ten play now. I believe that in 7 of the last 8 games, he's under 4 yards per carry, very unlike Katron that we've become accustomed to during his career. So where are you at with this backfield right now, Mark? Is there a situation where against a team like Oregon, now that we're in the postseason, where you may have to skew it a little bit more than we anticipated because you've clearly got a guy who seems to be a hot hand or trending in that direction in Nick Singleton? and then someone in Katron Allen who just can't seem to get it going in a consistent fashion. And I just wonder what J1 Sider, Andy Kotelnicki, and James Franklin ultimately determined to do with that setup as they get ready for the remaining matchups.
Well, I think it's going to be tough for Singleton to become like a 25 carry per game guy. I don't think you want to do that. I mean, he's finally healthy again. We saw it on that opening kickoff, and early, or it wasn't the opening kickoff, it was the second kickoff, I think. But you guys get the point. I mean, the zip is kind of there in his step, and I think if you try to overuse him, that may backfire on you. I mean, again, you have to win one game at a time. Well, you actually don't have to win this game, but to go where you need to go, you're going to need him to be healthy because he's operating at a different level than Katron. It's just a simple fact. Having said that, I think the ability to have a tough running back like Katron Allen, there's value in that. Is he popping the 15, 20-yard gains? No, he's not doing that, but he's being physical, and it's tough on the opponents having to bring that guy down. I think at the end of the day, we're still looking at a Penn State team that ranks second in the Big Ten in rushing yards per game to Iowa. And, that's an Iowa team that basically only rushed the ball when it played Maryland, right? I mean, so this is a well-balanced offense, and however Andy Kotelnicki's getting it done, whether it's with Tyler Warren, whether it's with Bo Pribula, or whether, and listen, it's actually true this year that Drew Aller has been a much more dangerous runner than he's ever been. They're getting the job done. So I don't think this is a time to panic and go away from Katron. I think keep doing what you're doing, because if you get in a grind where you're playing 3 or 4 games, that's where I think a guy like Katron Allen's value becomes better and better and better. Again, clearly Nick Singleton is playing at a different level than all the other running backs. The explosiveness is back, but you can't turn your back on Katron Allen, in my view.
It was, I just want to correct myself, 6 of the last 8 Big Ten matchups, Allen was under 4 yards per carry. The last time he was over that mark was against Washington when Nick Singleton essentially unavailable for the second half. 20 carries, 98 yards against Washington with a touchdown. Last few games, 6 carries for 20 yards against Purdue, 7 carries for 10 yards against Minnesota, 13 carries for 30 yards against Maryland. So we'll find out more about what that tandem has in store for Oregon on Saturday. But I think you're right, Mark. I don't think you change up everything that you've kind of relied upon with that running back plan. But you'd love to have both these guys working in positive directions. And right now, tough sledding for number 13 as opposed to number 10. Daniel, before we shift gears and jump into recruiting with Tyler Calvaruso, we did see a lot of young players on the field. Mark talked about this early on. Not only did you get some of those veteran players, some extra rest here in the month of November with some blowout results, but more frequent use of the freshmen. Cooper Cousins was out there for 30-plus snaps on Saturday. We've seen him a bunch. Dejon Lane had an interception. We've seen him a bunch too. But there were guys like Xavier Gilliam, 20 snaps at defensive tackle. They need help at that position from a depth perspective. Anthony Specca played an increased amount at linebacker. They need help at depth there going into the postseason. Tyseer Denmark caught a touchdown as time expired, as Mike Loxley noticed. And you wonder, could there be a role for him or more looks for him in the postseason? Anyone on that freshman list specifically intrigue you now that the regular season has wrapped up? And this is knowing full well that it may only take 5 or 6 snaps for a guy to make a momentum swinging play in the postseason. We're not expecting any of these freshmen all of a sudden break through the starting lineup going out of the regular season.
I think you start with Cousins, and I pulled it up, and he played, according to PFF, he did 15 snaps at center and 12 at right guard. And I think through much of the season, we had primarily seen him at guard here and there. And so I think that was notable because you think about what his long-term future could be at Penn State. Is there a succession plan for behind Nick Dawkins whenever Dawkins decides to move on? I thought that stood out to me because I'm sure Cooper Cousins has played center earlier this year, but it had been a while, and maybe it hadn't necessarily been in Big Ten play because I know that earlier this year Penn State was rewarding Dom Ruley with some reps at center in some of these blowouts. So that stood out to me in terms of a bigger picture, long-term thing. I think when you talk about guys that we saw that could be in the mix on Saturday or later this month, Gilliam is a big one. You talk about the depth I don't know if you want to call it an issue, but the departures and injuries that you've had at defensive tackle change things around for you a little bit. With Durant, Jay Thomas, and Izzard as your top guys who have the most experience and have had the biggest workloads. So if Gilliam can find a way to take, 10 to 15 snaps against Oregon off someone's plate, I think that could be big. And he's twitchy. We've seen him do some things out there. I think he and Jalen Harvey, the two Quince Orchard products from the DC suburbs in Maryland, they've both really impressed. And I think that they've been really ready since they've gotten here and have been ready for those opportunities that they've had on the field. I thought it was nice to see Dejon Lane make a play, get that ball in his hands. And when he had the ball in his hands, he could move. James Franklin mentioned that they had conversations about whether he could play wide receiver when he was at the Gilman School in Baltimore. But I mean, he looked natural with the ball in his hands. And we've seen the pendulum shift a little bit more towards Tyrese Mills as a rotational safety away from Dejon Lane as the season has gone on. So what can Lane do? Maybe a little confidence boost going into the Big Ten title game. And then Tysier Denmark, maybe we'll see more than him. Franklin has said a couple times this year, we're going to need him. We're going to need him. And it's still mostly been those four guys getting the majority of the reps. But we've gotten good feedback on him from behind the scenes. His teammates seem to be impressed with him, and to put a touchdown on the board for a young guy, I think that that's something that can really generate some confidence.
Special teams, an area to watch with these guys. James Franklin shouted out Anthony Specca's special teams impact against Maryland. He also mentioned that Dejon Lane was close to blocking a punt in that matchup. So all three phases, just keep an eye on some of these first-year players as Penn State looks for any edge it can get. There should be no more cupcakes on the schedule now that we're into postseason play. It should be very slim margins week in and week out. For a final thought from you guys here, I'm going to turn to you, Mark, for it. What do you make of this week in the grand scheme for James Franklin, for this Penn State era? We know that whatever happens on Saturday, unless we get thrown a devastating curveball from the committee, Penn State's in the playoff. And now we're wondering if that means they're going to be home for a matchup if they were to lose. Would they be penalized with a loss and maybe drop out of home field advantage? But if they win, they could be the number one overall seed in this tournament, certainly have a bye week. So, Mark, it seems like people in the building, in the Lash building themselves, weren't thinking this was going to be their reality this week. Everyone thought Ohio State was going to win. Now that it's here for them, now that they're in the thick of it, what do you think they stand to gain from this opportunity?
I'll tell you who gets the gravity of this is James Franklin. I mean, he was on a Zoom call with us and he looked like he hadn't slept. That's just the way he's wired. I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean, this guy is going, whatever you say about James Franklin, I remember him saying this when he was first hired, that, you may be better looking, you may be more talented, but nobody's going to outwork me. And that is true. I mean, I think we have a feel for what this guy's all about. So I think he understands this game. To me, is more important to him because fairly or unfairly, he has this monkey on his back about not being able to beat the best teams. And what better way to erase all of that? Everything with Ohio State that people have talked about, you win this game and nobody's talking about that anymore. They're just not, until the next time you play Ohio State, obviously, but that's just the way it is. So I think this is actually a bigger game for him personally. Because if they lose, as you said, according to Heather Dinich, who I really respect, used to work at the Center Daily Times at ESPN, I think she's as good as it gets when it comes to projecting this stuff. If Penn State loses, I think she still has them with a home game. So you're still going to get a home game. You're still going to be in a very good situation. So I think for just the overall perception of James Franklin and the perception of the program, it's very big. One other thing I would like to add, and I know I'm going on a little bit long here, but and I wrote this, that, this whole criticism that James Franklin only beats the teams he's supposed to beat, that has become more ridiculous than ever as you look at what's happening this year and you see the teams that aren't doing it. And you look at the number of 11-win seasons that he's had at Penn State in 10 years compared to how many Penn State had in the previous 22, and it's the same number. So, he has taken Penn State to a certain level. And I want to be very careful when I say this is a big game for him, because I think he's done a tremendous job. But again, fair or not, they're always going to put up those stats of his record against top 5 opponents. And this is a way to wipe all of that out. You're getting number one. You're getting it number one on a neutral field, a place you've been as a coach. In Big Ten country, they're traveling farther than you are. I mean, this is an opportunity to erase all of that.
31 straight wins over unranked opponents for Penn State to this point. And in terms of what you're saying, maybe viewed as the ho-hum wins and kind of, well, you're supposed to get that done. A lot of teams aren't getting that done. Guys, appreciate it. We got a lot of work together to get done this week. We'll be back at National Signing Day, press conferences on Wednesday. We'll be back on the practice field on Wednesday. We've got player calls. So a lot of coverage coming your way at Lions247.com. Both Mark and Daniel will hop on for a second podcast together this week before they get on a plane and head to Indianapolis. So guys, buckle up. It's Big Ten Championship game week, and appreciate your perspective.
Thanks, Tyler.
Yep.
Let's get into recruiting conversation now with Tyler Calvaruso. And hate to bury the lead, Tyler. Normally, we'd be paying a lot more attention to National Signing Day heading into this week, but we've got a Big Ten championship game, as I know you've heard, to cover. But nonetheless, a significant milestone moment for Penn State on the recruiting trail, an annual event to celebrate as you seal the plans with a large chunk of your incoming roster. And a bunch of these guys, as usual, will be part of this program in January, getting underway with their work, helping Penn State to pursue a chance to get into the 2025 Big Ten championship game. So we're going to put more of a spotlight on that later this week on Wednesday itself for signing day. But thank you for hopping on. We got some notes and news to gather and get to.
Yeah, man, I'm glad to be back. You know, my importance got pushed back by about a week here, but Penn State's going to get the chance to play for some hardware, so I don't think anyone's complaining about that.
Let's get to the bad news first, and that is the fact that Penn State lost a commitment from their class. We've talked a lot about the Nittany Lions pursuing flips from other teams' classes, and we'll do that in a moment, but Jaden Woods, top 100 edge rusher out of Kansas. He was considered the top-rated overall prospect in this Penn State recruiting class until late last week. We addressed this on our most recent episode with you, Tyler, which I think dropped last Tuesday. But he had spent a game weekend over with the Florida Gators, was in attendance a couple Saturdays ago for a victory over Ole Miss. Nice environment in Gainesville. Ultimately now, that's where he's going to call his college home. He has flipped his commitment to the Florida Gators from the Penn State Nittany Lions, and I don't think there's a way to sugarcoat this. This is a significant loss at a premier position for anybody in the country. You want to load up on top-tier edge rushers. So this is a sting as we get closer to signing day.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I know some will argue, why is losing any high school recruit this big of a loss? Because, it's all projection at this point in the process as opposed to, going out in the portal and getting a more established player. But the fact of the matter is we have Woods solidly in that top 100. The projection on him is really, really strong. We've talked about it a bunch. Just his frame and athleticism for the way he moves on the defensive line, how strong he is. Kid's built like an ox. So it's Penn State was excited to get him on board back in the summer as part of this 25 class. There's a lot of optimism about his future inside the Lash building. Now he's heading to Gainesville. Definitely a loss. The good news here for Penn State is they're still in a good place with their defensive line recruiting. Deion Barnes has had a good cycle at the position. You got to factor Max Granville into that as well. He was going to be part of this class originally before his decision to reclassify and join the Nittany Lions this fall. But losing Woods right before signing day, it's a tough blow. And Penn State, they're missing out on a really, I think, who's going to be a really good player at the next level. But there's still a lot of internal optimism about the group on board set this on Wednesday. So if you're a Penn State fan trying to take a silver lining from this situation, it's that.
Yeah, he wasn't a one-man show at the edge rusher spot for this class, but another addition there more recently, in fact, the most recent addition for this class is Chaz Coleman, a high upside edge rusher from Ohio, someone who was on the rise in the 2024 or 2025 recruiting rankings, ultimately collected a bunch of power conference opportunities later than most in his class. And as we noted, though, Ohio State stepped up to the plate with a late offer to an in-state prospect in Coleman. We talked about that a little bit last week. Now that the Woods situation has ultimately reached a negative reality for Nittany Lions fans, where are things trending between Coleman and the Buckeyes based on your conversations?
Well, things have settled down there from the Penn State perspective. It's sounding like Penn State has weathered that storm. Coleman was set to visit Ohio State for an official This past weekend, it didn't happen. Instead, Coleman makes it back to Happy Valley for a visit with the Nittany Lions and their staff. So it's looking good for Penn State and Coleman right now. He's expected to sign on Wednesday, which I find to be, and I think a lot of other people would agree with this assessment, I think it's massive. Ohio State, they've done well in situations like this before. They come in late for an in-state kid, and, they turn the tide late in the game. It seems like Coleman is going to be spurning his in-state Buckeyes here, signing with Penn State. I think Deion Barnes, assuming he does indeed put pen to paper, as we're anticipating, Deion Barnes deserves a lot of credit for getting this one done. The entire staff, really, because, it goes without saying, an Ohio kid, there's a lot of draw to Ohio State. But Chaz Coleman developed some really good relationships with the Penn State staff dating back to the middle of September when the Nittany Lions offered. Barnes was at the center of that. James Franklin's been at the center of that. The entire defensive staff has been at the center of that. So Penn State was able to fight off a really formidable foe in this situation. At least that's the way things are looking right now. I feel good about Coleman landing in the class when it's all said and done. Penn State feels the same.
Anything new to add on Zahir Mathis, who obviously is at that edge rusher spot? He's a guy that Penn State was involved in very early in his high school career in Philadelphia, spent several months committed to Ohio State, recently backed off that commitment, has reopened things, and now we have a little more heads up on his timeline, which you can probably share with our audience. Is he a name that we need to know, especially considering Jaden Woods is no longer in the equation?
And we're going to have to see where things go on that front beyond the initial contact after Mathis backed off his commitment to Ohio State. Deion Barnes did reach out shortly thereafter. We're going to have to see where things go from this point on. There hasn't been necessarily a ton of buzz right now, but with Mathis looking to extend things beyond this early signing period, sign more towards February, it's looking like. You also have to keep in mind, too, these guys can, even if they don't sign during the early signing period, they could just sign their scholarship papers in January and enroll when they see fit. But Mathis is looking like it's going to be a little bit more drawn out than that. Right now, it's TBD on the direction things go from the Penn State side. But Mathis, he's going to have interest really from across the country. I think that there's going to be a lot of involvement with him down the stretch from programs that might not even be in the race right now. Some programs are probably trying to work on some own things on their edge rusher boards, and Mathis could come into the picture later. But again, TBD from the Penn State side right now.
Yeah, as we just discussed, we're getting a bit of a late season look on the current freshman edge rushers. Max Granville, who did reclassify from this 2025 group back in the summer, and then Jalen Harvey off the edge as well out of Maryland. So a couple building blocks for the future, but you want to continue to bring in and stockpile talent there. And we'll see if Zahir Mathis is part of that plan. If Chaz Coleman does indeed follow through and sign on Wednesday, and as we said, Jaden Woods, a significant loss, but there are some other players. I'll just throw in the name Deshaun Burnett right now because I don't know where he's listed, whether it's an athlete, linebacker, edge over at 24/7 Sports. I think he was listed as a linebacker when he initially committed to Penn State last winter, early spring. But we got eyes on this kid on a camp circuit. We've seen his high school film, a lot to like about his length, his physical frame, and I think he's somebody that you can certainly project as being a blue chip defensive end type down the road if that's where he lands. So just wanted to get that out there as well. Let's go over to what was the buzziest name on the flip scene this past weekend, and that was Bryce Baker, top 24/7 quarterback from North Carolina who is committed to North Carolina. And if you hadn't heard, there's a lot going on there in Chapel Hill. Mac Brown will not be retained as the head coach. He's moving on after his second stint with the Tar Heels, and thus we don't know who the head coach is going to be at North Carolina. We don't know who the offensive coordinator is going to be or the quarterback's coach in 2025. And so it seems like Baker and his family are trying to get some questions answered on that end from UNC, but we know they got a chance to explore things in Happy Valley with an official visit this last weekend. We got an update over at Lions247.com on Monday about this. What do you think are the most important points to get across to our audience there about this developing relationship late in the cycle between Penn State and Bryce Baker?
Yeah, the manner in which North Carolina answers the question of who's going to be its next head coach and who's going to be its next OC, it's going to go a long way into determining the way this one plays out. Because you ask around, you get the sense that Bryce Baker truly does love North Carolina, loves the Tar Heels. Growing up in North Carolina, it's his in-state school. And he's giving UNC every chance to get this hire right from his perspective and bring the right OC to develop him. That's why he's still on board and committed to the Tar Heels. But He gets to Penn State now that he's exploring his options. It was his first trip to State College, and Penn State rolled out the red carpet for him. They pushed really hard to sell Baker on the offensive creativity under Andy Kolnicki, the development angle with Danny O'Brien taking care of that, and of course, head coach James Franklin played a huge part in Penn State's pitch to Baker over the weekend. It's really just going to come down to how that North Carolina news is received from the Baker camp, and also when North Carolina moves on a head coach. That's something Baker and his camp are going to be monitoring quite closely moving forward. When it comes to potential flip, I think if it's not going to be North Carolina, Penn State has put itself in a really good spot. LSU is also kicking around for Baker, but, with the recruiting timeline and calendar being what it is, not so sure that the Tigers are going to come into play here down the stretch. Penn State did all it could with Baker over the weekend. Now we're kind of in wait and see mode because that UNC move, it's going to be big.
6'2", 6'3", pushing towards 200 pounds right now. The number 13 quarterback nationally in our rankings at 24/7 Sports, the number 148 player overall. And he has been committed to North Carolina since June 2023, shortly after his sophomore year of high school. So we're talking about a lot to think about in a short period of time. And it sounds like, Tyler, correct me if I'm wrong, Bryce Baker is prepared to maybe go through the early signing period, which is Wednesday through Friday this week, without signing in order to make sure he has a clear picture of what his options are and what the coaches are in play. I mean, is this essentially he's willing to wait? It was hard for you to answer right now, but you see this willing to wait an indeterminate amount of time, or is this more like, hey, you've got about a week to figure this out, and then I want to figure my plan? Because he wants to be on a campus in January, I'd imagine, right?
Yeah, he does. That's the goal here. So I don't think it's going to be an indeterminate amount of time. I think it's got to wrap up in a realistic timeline. He's not going to sit around and wait for as long as he has to. But it seems like, if it needs to go beyond the 3-day early signing period, it will. If he needs to take a little bit of extra time after that to just figure out what UNC is doing and, evaluate things from that perspective, he will. But January is the goal. January enrollment is the goal for Bryce Baker. And that's important. That's kind of why I mentioned earlier about guys being able to just, if they don't sign during the early signing, it doesn't mean you have to wait until February. It means you can just enroll at your school of choice in January, sign those scholarship papers, enroll, and get ready to go. Could Baker wind up in that scenario? We're going to have to see because, again, what North Carolina does and the timeline on which they do it are big, big time factors.
Beckham Kritzer remains on board with Penn State's 2025 class at quarterback. Whoever comes to campus will be following a fringe top 100 quarterback prospect that's done some good things on campus without getting to a game this year, and Ethan Grunkemeyer. And by the way, Baker attends East Forsyth High School in North Carolina. That is the same high school where Danny O'Brien, Penn State's current quarterbacks coach, once starred at the prep level. So an interesting tie-in to this relationship moving ahead. Anything else on the flip front that we need to know about? Less than 48 hours now before Penn State announces what this class looks like here on December 4th. We've talked about a bunch of different players at different points. Gompers, Olish, Finney, Zollers earlier, not too long ago, but a little bit more in the rearview mirror. Do you have anything else to kind of add on any of these guys at this stage? And if you don't, that's okay. We don't want to put the pressure on you to say something that you're not confident in right now, but anything else to kind of put out there in the conversation here on a Monday?
Well, Penn State's going to continue to push with Andrew Olish, Bradley Gompers all the way up until they sign. Same goes for Finney, even though it looks like Oregon's going to be the one to get that one done in the end after Penn State kind of stole back the momentum in October. It looks like Oregon's in a good spot there. With Olish, I'd say the most interesting development over the weekend was Oregon did a really good job with 5-star Lincoln Cure on his official visit. There are some crystal balls in Oregon's favor there. And Oregon already has a tight end commit in its class in Vanderploeg, who was already a previous flip from Washington. So if Cure were to get into a class, how does that impact things with Olish? And you also got to keep in mind, Michigan, from everything I've heard, they remain confident that Olish will hang there. So Penn State's going to continue working this one. And then, of course, over the weekend, they got Brian Kordovich, the former Purdue commit, recently former Purdue commit, on campus for an official. What's interesting with Kordovich is he does not have an offer from Penn State right now. But if that door were to open, the Nittany Lions would be in a really, really good spot to move on him. He was an official visit candidate late in the summer, but he wrapped up his recruitment earlier than a lot of people thought with that commitment in Purdue. Never made it back to Penn State after camping for the staff early in June. Returned over the weekend for the regular season finale for an official. Had a good visit. And now it's kind of wait and see. They're going to go on Olish all the way until the end, but they also like Kordovich as well, and that's something to monitor.
Kordovich, number 44 tight end in our rankings at 24/7 Sports out of Cleveland, Ohio. And you'd understand why people are looking to maybe jump ship with Purdue commitments. And we've got a bunch of players going to the transfer portal from that program. They have a coaching change underway. So just another name to monitor there. Tyler, before we say goodbye, let's look back at the regular season finale for Penn State because, look, it's the 2025 class show right now. It's signing day week. We're going to be paying attention to that class. But the 2026 class and beyond continues to make their way to Beaver Stadium for these games. You got 3 names that you wanted to make sure we mentioned from that Maryland guest list. Get to them and tell them why we need to know them.
Yeah, big one I'm monitoring right now is Jaquaden Guilford, wide receiver from Indiana, made it back to campus for a visit. Penn State had been pushing to make that happen throughout the fall. And he's not a name that we've discussed a whole lot in the wide receiver recruiting conversation. Going back to late in the summer, me and you touched on him a little bit as, hey, keep an eye on this guy. Penn State really likes him. We're going to see where things go. And it's gotten to the point where they're really going because we've got crystal ball picks in for Guilford to ultimately land with the Nittany Lions. They've done a really, really good job of recruiting him. And, it would not surprise if that one wraps up in Penn State's favor sooner rather than later. One we're monitoring really in conjunction with this early signing period. And then beyond him, a pair of in-state targets. Well, really 3 in-state targets, depending on how you look at it. North Carolina cornerback commit Danny Odom. He plays his prep ball down in Florida, but he's a Pennsylvania native. I believe he's from Farrell. He gets an offer from the Nittany Lions while on campus over the weekend. He's keeping his options open given everything that's going on at North Carolina. So Penn State's in that mix now. Schools like Florida, Florida State have jumped into that mix. So his recruitment, even though he's still committed, it seems pretty open at this point. Joey O'Brien, top-ranked player in Pennsylvania, back on campus. Penn State continues to fare really, really well with him. Originally it seemed like he was a Notre Dame lean. There's a crystal ball picking in favor of the Fighting Irish. I think Penn State has really worked its way into that mix. And O'Brien, he's gelling pretty well with the staff, gelling pretty well with Anthony Poindexter. That's something to keep a really close eye on moving forward. That relationship, because there have been conversations about what position O'Brien will play at the next level. He really likes Anthony Poindexter. So if it's going to be safety, that relationship is a feather in Penn State's cap. And then down in Philly, not too far from O'Brien and Newman Goretti, is athletic in-state edge rusher Y.D. Collier, who made it back to campus for his second visit in less than a month. Got a different kind of look at Penn State during this visit. He and his family got on campus a little bit earlier than most. They wanted to see more of campus. They wanted to see more of downtown State College, just the surrounding area. That went over really well. My biggest takeaway from my conversation with Collier is that he might wrap his recruitment up in January. And at that point, if he does stick on that timeline, everything I've heard from checking in with sources familiar with his recruitment, Penn State's in the best spot there. So maybe some crystal ball action soon. We'll see. Going to keep working the phones on that once things slow down the 25 front a little bit. But it's looking good for Penn State and Collier. And it's really looking good with all those 3 that I just mentioned. Those 4, rather, excuse me.
Some good in-state perspective there from Tyler Calvaruso on the next class coming up for Penn State. They're trying to do their work, laying that foundation. They're going to seal the deal with a huge group of incoming freshmen this week, and we'll break that down. National Signing Day coverage over at Lions247.com. Get on board now today on Cyber Monday for 75% off. And, of course, coming out of the Big Ten championship game, they pull off that win. We're going to have a lot more feedback from the recruiting world about how maybe prospects are looking at the Big Ten champion version of Penn State differently than they were in just a couple weeks ago or heading into the season. But we'll get there when we get there. Tyler, busy week for you, busy week for us. Appreciate you hopping on the podcast to break some things down. And we'll do this again later in the week. Check out our National Signing Day episode. That'll drop on Wednesday.
Yep, looking forward to it, man. Thanks.
That's going to do it for this episode of the Lions 24/7 podcast. Thanks to everyone for joining us. Before Tyler, you heard from Daniel Gallen and Mark Brennan. We'll all be putting in the work at Lions247.com this week. So head on over for the latest. We've got a couple more episodes coming your way for the Lions 24/7 podcast. And of course, Saturday is the day in Indianapolis, Big Ten championship game. It all comes down to that. And then we learn the playoff fate for these Nittany Lions. For now, Tyler Donahue stepping aside. This has been the Lions 24/7 podcast.